It started with laughter. Not the kind that fills a room with warmth, but the cold, sharp kind that slices into your skin before you even realize you've been cut. Amara lay flat on the polished wooden floor of the Kyoto Dojo, pain blooming in her shoulder where she'd hit the ground. Her bamboo shinai had clattered across the floor. A ring of students in white gi stood watching, silent for a beat, before the snickering began. One of them muttered something in Japanese she couldn't quite make out. Another said clearly in English, "Nice try, foreigner." The humiliation tasted metallic in her mouth, sharper than the bruises forming beneath her uniform. She rose slowly, hands steady even though her legs ached. Her breath came in tight, shallow pulls. She didn't cry. Not here. Not now. Her eyes met theirs, half amused, half dismissive. None of them offered to help her up. No one said a word. The polished floor beneath her cheek had felt like ice. The scent of sweat, old wood, and liniment oil filled her lungs as she tried to breathe through the sting of pain and embarrassment. Around her, white gi fluttered faintly as students shifted, waiting to see what she'd do. Her pride throbbed louder than her bruises. It wasn't just the fall, it was what it symbolized. That she didn't belong, that she wasn't one of them, that all her efforts still made her nothing but a tourist playing warrior. Amara, 22, African American. Born in Atlanta, raised on stories of samurai from a grandfather who swore Bushido was the reason he survived Vietnam and 1,000 smaller wars in the streets of his youth. "You fight with your mind first. The sword comes second," he always said, tapping his temple. From the moment he handed her a worn copy of Hagakure, something had shifted inside her. A fascination. A calling. While her classmates followed TikToks and NBA trades, she studied Japanese history, learned katakana in her spare time, and begged for summer classes in martial arts. It wasn't a phase. It was a promise, to him and to herself. She remembered a summer afternoon in Atlanta, 11 years old, her grandfather kneeling in the yard, placing a wooden stick in her hand, whispering, "Grip it like truth, swing it like justice." He wasn't smiling then. He'd seen war, real war. And yet, he spoke about Bushido as if it had saved his soul. She hadn't understood then, but now she did. She'd landed a rare cultural scholarship to study traditional kendo in Japan, something awarded to only 10 international applicants a year. Kyoto, steeped in centuries of tradition, cherry blossoms, temples, and the silent weight of heritage, had felt like a dream come true. But now, 3 months in, she was barely tolerated, often ignored, and occasionally targeted. There were the looks first, subtle, prolonged stares that weren't just about being foreign. They lingered longer on her skin. In the shared changing room, the others kept distance, speaking in lowered voices, switching to dialects she hadn't yet learned when she entered. On her first week, her uniform mysteriously went missing, only to be found stained and balled behind the toilet in a plastic bag. When she tried to report it, the dojo assistant smiled politely and told her perhaps she had misplaced it. Microaggressions clung to her daily like humidity, being skipped in pairings, passed over when she raised her hand to ask a question, or being asked repeatedly if she'd ever even held a sword before coming to Japan. Still, she endured. Every insult pushed her deeper into her training. She rose earlier, stayed later. She moved her body like her life depended on it, because in many ways it did. Her dignity, her presence, her worth, all rested on proving she deserved to be here. But that day, when Takeshi, top student, golden boy of the dojo, deliberately tripped her during a light sparring session and sent her crashing to the floor, something inside her cracked. "You move like a dancer, not a warrior," he sneered loud enough for the others to hear. Laughter followed, and for the first time, Amara felt something colder than shame. She felt the sharp tip of rage. She wanted to scream, to shout in their language that she had trained, studied, bled for this, that she'd crossed an ocean for this. But all she could do was breathe in and breathe out, like her grandfather taught her. A warrior shows no weakness, not even when her bones are shaking and the entire room is laughing. Later that evening, when the dojo had emptied and the sun had dipped low behind the shoji windows, she stayed behind. The room was quiet, peaceful, only the soft creak of the wood beneath her feet and the distant chirping of cicadas outside. She bowed alone to the kamidana and stood in the center, drawing slow, controlled breaths. Then she moved, first in silence, then with speed. Her strikes were cleaner now, her stance lower, her cuts sharper. She was no longer copying movements from a manual. Her body remembered them. Her muscles flowed like ink across a page. Alone, she was everything they said she couldn't be. Unseen, the janitor paused near the corner entrance, leaning on his broom. His eyes followed her with quiet curiosity. His face was lined with age, his hair tied neatly behind his head, and though he said nothing, his silence felt less like dismissal and more like recognition. He didn't interrupt, just gave a slow, respectful nod before walking off into the corridor shadows. That night, back in her tiny dorm room above a nearby shop, Amara pulled out the katana her grandfather had given her just before he passed. She had brought it with her, not to show off, but because it felt like the only piece of home she could carry across the ocean. Wrapped tightly in worn cloth, the sword had sat untouched since her arrival. She hesitated only a moment before peeling back the layers and revealing the blade. It wasn't ornate like the polished weapons of the other students, but there was beauty in its simplicity. The steel shimmered with age. Its hilt was wrapped in faded blue cord, and the handguard, small and round, bore a barely visible emblem, a blooming sakura crest. But what caught her eye were the 3 characters etched near the base of the blade. She took out her phone and scanned the symbols. The translation appeared slowly. Yukimura. She blinked. The name stirred something in her memory. Digging deeper, she opened her laptop and searched. Dozens of results. Historical references. The Yukimura were a lesser-known samurai clan, honorable, fierce, loyal to a fault. One line caught her breath. The last known descendant disappeared in the early 1900s, believed to have left Japan during the collapse of the Meiji era. Her fingers trembled. Her grandfather had never spoken of any Japanese ancestry, but she remembered how he sometimes muttered old proverbs under his breath that she couldn't place. How he bowed to her after sparring, even when no one was watching. She opened the old envelope tucked inside the sword's wrapping. A single sheet of parchment with handwritten kanji. She couldn't read it, but she felt its weight. This wasn't just a gift. It was a legacy. She hesitated, fingers trembling as she unwrapped the sword fully once more. Her breath caught when the cloth fell away. There was something ancient in the weight of the blade. It hummed faintly when she shifted it in the light, like it remembered being used, like it was waiting. Holding it, she felt something tighten inside her chest. Not fear, not even awe. Recognition. Her search led her through blog posts, digital archives, translated family records. Yukimura warriors were known not just for their loyalty, but for protecting outcasts, temple grounds, and forgotten towns. Her chest burned with questions. Was it possible? Could her grandfather's silence have hidden a legacy he thought would die with him? The next morning, Amara entered the dojo as the sun cut slanted beams through the rice paper windows. The usual ritual unfolded. The bow to the kamidana, the repetition of stances, the pairings. She kept her head down, but her mind buzzed like the cicadas outside. Takeshi stood across the room, adjusting his gloves, laughing with a few students. His voice wasn't loud, but she heard it anyway. "They'll let anyone in now, huh?" The others chuckled. No one stopped him. When pairings were announced, she was matched with him again. Of course. She stepped onto the mat, heart steady, hands firm. He gave her a long smirk. Back for more? She didn't answer. As the match began, she anticipated his aggression. He moved fast, swinging harder than was necessary. She blocked. He tried to fake her out. She countered. Then he swept low, not a kendo move, not allowed, and slammed his shin into hers. She stumbled, and he followed through, shoving her backward with his body. She hit the floor with a sharp breath. Snickers. A few whispers. The sensei, standing near the corner, didn't move. Takeshi stood over her and spat the words in clipped English. You think holding a sword makes you one of us? She got to her knees, slowly. No, she said softly. But blood might. That shut him up for a moment. Still kneeling, she turned to her bag near the bench and unzipped it carefully. Inside was the wrapped katana. The dojo quieted as she walked back to the center, cloth bundle in hand. She stopped in front of the sensei, bowed low, then unwrapped the sword. The reaction was immediate. The sensei stepped forward, his brows knitting. Where did you get this? He asked in Japanese. Amara straightened. It was passed down to me, from my grandfather. He took a step closer, inspecting the emblem on the tsuba, then the kanji. His eyes widened ever so slightly. Do you know what this says? He asked her. She nodded. Yukimura. The murmurs around the room grew louder. Another student gasped. That clan is extinct. The sensei turned to the rest of the class. This sword, if authentic, belongs to the Yukimura, a line of warriors known for protecting temples during the Sengoku period. Their style was lost, thought forgotten. Takeshi scoffed. A sword isn't proof. Anyone could carry that. The sensei looked at him sharply. You question the sword's legacy? I question hers, Takeshi snapped. She's not Japanese. She's not one of us. Silence fell like a blade between them. The sensei didn't speak immediately. Then, in a low voice, he said, Blood remembers. It travels through generations, sometimes even across oceans. He turned back to Amara. If you truly wish to prove your place here, there is a way. She didn't hesitate. Tell me. He looked at the room. Tomorrow morning, you will demonstrate your skill, not against Takeshi, against history. You will show us what lives in your blood. Amara nodded. That night, she sat on the floor of her room surrounded by documents she hadn't dared to read before. Old letters, postcards from Okinawa, a journal entry mentioning someone named Hideo Yukimura, a black and white photo of a tall man in kimono standing with Japanese officers. On the back, my grandfather, Hideo, gone, but not forgotten. Her hands shook, her throat tightened. Her blood, her story, was not a lie. The next morning came early. The dojo was silent when she arrived. The entire class stood in a half-circle. Even the janitor was present, standing at the back with arms crossed. The sensei stood in the center, nodding at her. Begin. She bowed, then moved. Every kata flowed through her like water over stone. Her body knew where to be. Her feet struck with purpose. Her hands sliced air with memory older than her own. She moved not just like a student, but like someone returning to something she was always meant to know. The crowd didn't laugh. They didn't speak. Takeshi stared, arms tight against his chest, but said nothing. When she finished, the silence lingered. Then the sensei stepped forward and bowed to her, deeply. This dojo does not bow to race, to color, or to passport, he said. We bow to the warrior. She blinked back tears. Behind her, the janitor smiled faintly, then bowed too. One by one, the students followed. Even Takeshi hesitated. then gave a curt, shallow bow. It didn't matter. She'd already won. The dojo was never truly quiet after that day, even when no one spoke. Whispers floated just beyond Amara's hearing. Students glanced at her sword whenever she carried it, some with curiosity, others with resentment. The sensei had not repeated his words, had not proclaimed her a descendant of any clan, but the silence that followed had left room for speculation. And speculation was poison. Rumors spread fast, curling like smoke into every corner. Some students muttered that she must have forged the kanji herself, that she was playing some elaborate trick to gain attention. Others whispered that the sensei had only bowed to her out of pity, or worse, foreign favoritism. Amara walked through the halls with her shoulders straight, but her ears burned from the words they didn't bother to lower their voices for. Foreigner. Pretender. Imposter. Takeshi especially seemed to thrive in this new atmosphere. He had not forgotten his humiliation, standing silent as the sensei bowed to her. But humiliation in the proud never fades. It festers. He targeted her in drills, hitting harder, moving faster, whispering taunts as his shinai cracked against hers. The blood of liars is still red, he sneered one evening when the others had paired off. His strikes were deliberate, punishing. When she parried one blow, he deliberately shoved his shoulder into her chest, knocking her back. The instructor turned away, pretending not to notice. That hurt worse than the impact. The authority of the dojo was silent, and silence gave permission. Public humiliation followed her beyond the dojo walls. In the marketplace, dressed in her gi after a morning of training, she felt the stares of passers-by. A group of teenagers snickered openly, one pointing and saying in broken English, "Samurai girl! Black samurai!" They bowed mockingly, their laughter chasing her down the street. Her face burned, but she refused to run. She walked through it, spine unbroken, though every step felt like wading through glass. At the train station, a businessman sneered when she bumped him accidentally. "Foreigners!" he spat in Japanese, loud enough for others to hear. She understood more of the language now, enough to know he added a second word under his breath. Kuro. Black. She swallowed it, forced herself to keep her chin up, but inside, shame and anger twisted into something sharp. At night, when the dormitory fell silent, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. The photo of her great-grandfather, Hideo Yukimura, lay on the desk beside her bed. She studied his features in the dim light, searching for pieces of herself. The lines of his jaw, the posture of his body, the calm strength in his stance. Was she really his descendant? Or was it a story she was telling herself to survive? She wanted to believe, desperately, but doubt crept in like water through cracked wood. What if Takeshi was right? What if she was just a girl chasing shadows of honor that never truly belonged to her? The days grew harsher. During one group sparring exercise, Takeshi landed a brutal strike across her ribs, hard enough to make her drop her shinai. She staggered, clutching her side, gasping for breath. He didn't wait. He struck again, this time across her back, sending her sprawling. Laughter erupted around the room. Someone clapped mockingly. Another voice said, "Samurai! She can't even stand." She forced herself up, every muscle screaming, and took her stance again. Pride alone held her upright, but the laughter echoed, drilling into her bones. The janitor saw her later that night, alone in the dojo again. Her gi was damp with sweat, her movements slower, weighed down by exhaustion. He watched for a long time before finally stepping forward, broom in hand. "You practice as if the walls are watching," he said softly in Japanese. She froze, surprised. It was the first time he had spoken to her. "Perhaps they are," she answered quietly. He studied her sword, lying on the mat beside her. "That blade," he said, "is not meant for decoration. It belonged to warriors who carried both shame and honor on their shoulders. Do you know what the crest means? She shook her head. I know only the name, Yukimura. He leaned on his broom, eyes distant. The Yukimura were guardians, protectors of the unwanted. They fought for villages others abandoned. They carried burdens willingly. To mock them is to mock those who cannot defend themselves. His gaze returned to hers, sharp despite his age. If this sword is truly yours, the blood you carry is not weakness. It is weight, heavy weight. Do you understand? She nodded slowly, throat tight. I think so. He inclined his head. Then carry it. And with that, he left, the quiet scrape of his broom fading down the corridor. Those words stayed with her. Weight, legacy, not privilege, not power, responsibility. She repeated them as she trained, as bruises bloomed across her arms and legs, as whispers followed her down streets and laughter echoed in her ears. But carrying that weight did not make her life easier. It made her resolve harder, her endurance deeper. She bled in silence and kept going. The next test of her endurance came not in training, but in a public demonstration arranged by the dojo for visiting patrons. It was supposed to be an opportunity for students to display their discipline and precision, to honor the traditions of kendo. For Amara, it became another stage for humiliation. When her turn came, Takeshi smirked as he stepped up opposite her. His bow was shallow, mocking. The moment the bout began, his strikes were merciless, heavier than permitted. Twice he hit her hand hard enough to numb her fingers, and once he struck her shoulder with such force that she nearly dropped her weapon. The crowd whispered, murmured, some laughing openly as she stumbled. Then came the final strike, a sweep that knocked her shinai from her grip. It clattered across the mat as she fell to her knees. Laughter rippled through the audience. Someone snapped a photo. Her humiliation was captured not just in memory, but in evidence to be shared. Takeshi bowed theatrically to the patrons, as if he had just defeated a worthy opponent, not bullied a peer. The sensei's face remained unreadable, but he said nothing. That silence was worse than scolding. That evening, Amara walked back alone, her GI damp with sweat, her pride bleeding with every step. Her phone buzzed. A classmate had sent her a message, no words, just a picture from the demonstration, her on her knees, Takeshi looming over her, the caption in Japanese translating roughly to Samurai of Shame. Her throat burned, but she refused to cry. Not here, not now. She closed the phone, shoved it deep into her bag, and kept walking. At the dorm, she found her locker door slightly ajar. Inside, her spare GI had been stained with ink, black blotches spreading across the white fabric like a wound. On the floor, her notebook lay torn, pages scattered. Written across one in thick marker, "Leave." She stood there, heart pounding, fists clenched so hard her nails dug into her palms. For a moment she thought she might scream, slam the locker shut, throw the words back at them. Instead, she gathered her belongings silently, folded the ruined fabric, and carried it back to her room. She would not give them the victory of seeing her break. But that night, as she stared at the sword laid across her desk, the weight of everything pressed down, the jeers, the slurs, the isolation. She touched the hilt gently, whispering to herself, "Why me?" The steel caught the lamplight, as if it held an answer she couldn't yet read. Days blurred together, each one another trial. Takeshi's taunts grew sharper, the students' whispers crueler. Kuroi Samurai, some of them called her now, the Black Samurai. What had started as mockery turned into a nickname, spread across the dojo like wildfire. Some used it to her face, others muttered it when she passed. It was meant as insult, but in her chest it burned like a challenge. If they were going to name her, she would redefine the name. But that strength wavered every time another humiliation struck. One afternoon, walking back from training, she stopped by a small bookstore tucked in an alley. The owner, an elderly man, looked up in surprise at her appearance, then softened. "You train at the old dojo," he said. She nodded cautiously. "I saw your blade once," he murmured. "That crest. Rare." He pulled a dusty book from a shelf, flipping pages until he stopped on an illustration. A warrior in armor, crest emblazoned on the chest plate. "Yukimura," he said. "Protectors of those left behind. They carried not only their families, but the weight of villages. Their line was said to end long ago." He closed the book gently, eyes on her. But sometimes, blood does not end. It waits. Her breath caught. "You know of them?" He nodded. "Only whispers. My grandfather told me stories. A warrior who vanished, crossing seas. He said some lines do not die, only sleep." He handed her the book. "Read." She bowed, gratitude in her chest. For the first time since she had arrived in Kyoto, someone spoke to her without mockery, without suspicion. Humanity, simple and fragile, but enough to keep her standing. Armed with this fragment of history, she returned to the dojo the next day with new resolve. But Takeshi was waiting. During warm-ups, he shoved past her deliberately, sending her stumbling. When she caught her balance, he sneered. "No book will save you. No old story will make you samurai." His voice carried, loud enough for others to hear. Laughter followed. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Not yet. The breaking point came during another group sparring. She faced a younger student, careful with her strikes, respectful. Takeshi intervened mid-bout, claiming he was correcting form. Instead, he struck her shoulder from behind, sending her stumbling forward into the younger boy. Both fell, tangled. Laughter erupted again. Takeshi leaned down, voice dripping with contempt. "Foreign blood. Tainted blood. You don't deserve this floor." His words were sharp, cutting deeper than any strike. Around them, students laughed, some nervously, others cruelly. No one helped her up. She lay on the mat for a long moment, chest heaving, vision blurred. Then she rose, slower than ever, but taller somehow. She picked up her shinai, met Takeshi's eyes, and in silence promised him this was not the end. The dojo had become a battlefield not of swords, but of whispers and silence. Every time Amara entered, heads turned. She could feel their stares before she even removed her shoes. The word outsider hung heavy in the air, unspoken but everywhere. Yet she refused to leave. Her grandfather's sword stayed by her side, a constant reminder that she carried something greater than herself. But carrying weight was not the same as being accepted. One evening, the tension broke into violence beyond sparring rules. During a drill, Takeshi struck her not once, but 3 times in succession, each blow harder than permitted, each strike aimed not at form, but at pain. The last hit cracked across her ribs, stealing her breath. She staggered back, clutching her side, vision swimming. Before she could recover, he shoved her, sending her sprawling onto the floor. The room erupted in laughter, students pointing, one even mimicking her fall. The sensei remained silent, expression unreadable, as if testing her resolve by refusing to intervene. Shame burned hotter than pain. As she pushed herself up, Takeshi bent close and hissed, "You carry nothing but lies. Your skin betrays you. No true samurai has blood like yours." The words struck deeper than his shinai ever could. She froze, nails digging into the mat, forcing herself not to break. Around them, the laughter grew louder, crueler, filling every corner of the dojo until it seemed the walls themselves mocked her. That night, she didn't go straight back to her dorm. She wandered through Kyoto's narrow streets, neon lights flickering above, the scent of grilled food and rain-damp stone in the air. Crowds bustled past, but she felt utterly alone. At a quiet shrine tucked between alleyways, she stopped. Kneeling, she lit a stick of incense and pressed her forehead against her clasped hands. "Grandfather," she whispered, voice trembling, "why did you give this to me? Did you know it would hurt this much?" No answer came, only the flicker of smoke rising into the night. But as she lifted her eyes, she noticed an old wooden plaque weathered by time. The characters etched upon it were faint but recognizable. The same crest, the sakura bloom, stared back at her. Her breath caught. This shrine had once been protected by the Yukimura clan. She wasn't imagining it. The threads of her history were real. She returned to the dojo with a new determination, but the hostility didn't lessen. Instead, it grew. One morning, she arrived to find her shoes missing from the entryway. In their place sat a torn scrap of paper, scrawled in Japanese, "Go home." Another day, during practice, someone had spilled water across the floor where she usually stood, leaving her to slip mid-form while others laughed. Every insult, every act of sabotage piled atop her shoulders, heavy as iron, yet she bore it. Each night she trained in solitude until her hands blistered and her muscles screamed. The janitor sometimes watched, his expression unreadable, though once she thought she saw approval flicker in his eyes. It was during one of these late-night sessions that he finally approached. "You train harder when no one sees," he said softly. She turned, sweat dripping from her brow. "Because it's the only time I can breathe," she answered. He nodded slowly, eyes falling to the sword resting nearby. "That blade carries a story few remember. But stories have a way of returning when the world needs them." She swallowed hard. "Then why do they hate me?" His gaze was steady. "Because you remind them of truths they'd rather bury. Blood is not always pure in the way they imagine. Honor does not choose skin. But fear blinds men, and pride turns fear into cruelty." His words struck her deeper than any insult had. She bowed her head, whispering, "Then I'll carry it alone." The janitor shook his head. "No one carries alone, not forever." And then, as always, he walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. The breaking point came during a larger gathering at the dojo, when visiting dignitaries arrived to observe the students. Takeshi saw his chance. In front of the guests, he called Amara out for a sparring match. The sensei's eyes narrowed, but he gave a nod. Amara stepped forward, pulse hammering in her ears. The bout began, and immediately Takeshi unleashed a storm of strikes, faster and harder than before. She blocked, countered, but his aggression was relentless. Then, with a deliberate shove, he sent her sprawling to the ground. Gasps filled the room. She tried to rise, but he kicked her shinai across the floor, forcing her to crawl after it as laughter erupted. "Look at her," he jeered in Japanese. "A foreigner crawling like a dog. This is the samurai you want to honor?" The words sliced through her like steel. Guests murmured, some clearly uncomfortable, others chuckling. Her face burned as hot as fire. The sensei finally raised his voice. "Enough!" But Takeshi wasn't finished. He leaned down close enough that only she could hear, though his tone carried to all. "Blood? You claim samurai blood? You're nothing but a fraud with dark skin and a stolen sword." The dojo fell silent. Even laughter died. His words hung heavy in the air, sharper than any strike. Amara's hands shook as she gripped her weapon. The insult wasn't just to her, it was to her grandfather, to the legacy she had only begun to understand. She wanted to scream, to strike, to tear down the walls with her rage. Instead, she stood, slowly, her back straight, her chin high. And in the silence that followed, she met his gaze with eyes that burned like fire. The sensei's expression was unreadable, but his voice was firm. "Tomorrow," he said, "at dawn, a duel, before all." Gasps rippled through the room. A duel at dawn was not casual practice. It was a reckoning. Amara bowed, her heart pounding, her body trembling, but her voice steady as she whispered, "Yes." Takeshi smirked, satisfied, certain of his victory. The students whispered. The guests exchanged glances. The janitor, watching from the shadows, lowered his head, eyes glinting with something unspoken. That night, Amara returned to her room, every nerve alive with fear and anticipation. She lit the lamp, unwrapped the sword, and placed it across her knees. The photo of Hideo Yukimura lay beside it. Her hands traced the lines of his face, her great-grandfather, the man who had once carried this very blade. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered into the quiet. "But if you are in me, if any part of your spirit survives, then guide me." The silence stretched, heavy but not empty. Somewhere deep within she felt it, a spark, faint but real. The blood in her veins pulsed with memory. Tomorrow would be the day the truth came to light. The dawn broke cold and silent. A pale mist clung to the ground as Amara stepped barefoot across the stones toward the dojo. The world felt suspended, every sound amplified, the crunch of gravel beneath her feet, the distant call of a crow, the beating of her own heart. She carried her grandfather's sword wrapped carefully in cloth, pressed against her chest like an anchor. The courtyard was already full. Students lined the edges, their faces tense with anticipation. Takeshi stood in the center, shinai in hand, his posture sharp with confidence. He smirked when he saw her, the expression of a man who believed victory had already been written. The sensei waited beside him, solemn. "This duel is not for spectacle," he declared. "It is for truth. Skill against skill. Spirit against spirit. The dojo will bear witness." He turned to Amara. "Do you understand?" She bowed low. "Yes." Her voice was steady, though her pulse thundered. She stepped forward, unwrapped the katana, and laid it gently at the side of the mat. She would not fight with it. It was too sacred, too sharp for this test. But its presence reminded everyone that this was not a game. She took her stance, shinai in hand. The air grew thick with silence. Takeshi lunged first, strikes fast and aggressive, his shinai whistling through the air. Amara blocked, her body moving instinctively, each motion echoing the katas she had drilled night after night alone. He pressed harder, his strikes fueled not by discipline but by fury. She absorbed each one, her arms trembling from the force, yet her stance unbroken. When he tried to sweep her legs, she sidestepped, the movement fluid, almost graceful. Gasps rippled through the crowd. They had expected her to fall quickly, but she was still standing. The fight dragged on, each strike louder, sharper. Takeshi's smirk faded, replaced with frustration. "You think you can beat me?" he hissed. "You don't belong here!" His words punctuated each blow. Amara's breath came in ragged bursts, her muscles burning. But she remembered the janitor's words. Weight, not weakness. She carried the weight of humiliation, of legacy, of every sneer and laugh. And with each strike she parried, she transformed that weight into strength. At last, she saw an opening. Takeshi swung wide, overcommitted. Amara pivoted, slipped past his guard and struck his side with precision. The crack of shinai against armor echoed. Takeshi staggered, shock flashing across his face. The students erupted in murmurs. She pressed forward, driving him back with a flurry of clean, deliberate strikes. Each movement was controlled, not wild, a dance of discipline. Finally, with one decisive blow, she knocked the shinai from his grip. It clattered across the mat. Silence fell. Takeshi dropped to his knees, stunned. The sensei stepped forward, voice ringing clear. Enough! He looked at Amara, then at the sword resting nearby. What we witnessed is not trickery, not foreign imitation. This is the spirit of the samurai, alive in her. He bowed deeply. Amara Yukimura, you carry a legacy long thought lost. Today, you have honored it. Gasps rippled through the room. The name, Yukimura, spoken aloud, affirmed by the master, settled over them like a revelation. Some students bowed immediately, respect overcoming doubt. Others hesitated, pride warring with tradition, but one by one they lowered their heads. Even Takeshi, jaw clenched, bent forward in reluctant acknowledgement. Amara stood frozen, heart pounding, tears burning behind her eyes. For months she had endured silence, mockery, violence. Now, before everyone, she was no longer a foreigner, no longer a fraud. She was seen. For the first time since her arrival in Japan, the dojo did not feel like an enemy. The air was heavy with silence, yes, but it was a silence of reckoning, not ridicule. Amara stood with her shinai lowered, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of exhaustion. Takeshi remained kneeling, his pride fractured, his breathing uneven. Around them, the students whispered to each other, their tones transformed from mockery to awe. She could feel the shift like a tide, subtle yet undeniable. The sensei broke the silence. "Do you understand now?" he asked the gathered students. "Samurai blood is not measured by skin. It is measured by spirit, by endurance, by the refusal to surrender when the world tries to break you." His gaze turned toward Amara. "And she has shown us all." The words struck deeper than any insult ever had. Tears pressed at the corners of her eyes, but she held them back. She had not come this far to weep in victory. Instead, she bowed, low and respectful, as she had always done, but now the bow was returned in earnest. Dozens of students lowered themselves before her, not out of pity, not reluctantly, but with genuine reverence. The sound of their gi rustling against the floor was like thunder in her ears. Takeshi remained bowed only briefly before rising to his feet. His face was pale, his jaw set. He stared at her with a mixture of fury and confusion, as if he could not reconcile the image of the girl he had mocked with the warrior who had just disarmed him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he turned sharply and left the mat, shoulders stiff with shame. The crowd parted for him in silence. It was not her victory over him that mattered now. It was her victory over doubt itself. That night, the dormitory was quieter than usual. Amara sat alone at her desk, the sword unwrapped beside her, its steel gleaming in the lamplight. She picked up the faded photograph of Hideo Yukimura, her great-grandfather, and traced the lines of his face. For so long, she had carried questions heavier than the blade itself. Now, for the first time, she felt the beginnings of an answer. She whispered into the night, "I carried you with me, even when I didn't know it." The next morning, she walked to the dojo with her head higher than ever before. Students she passed bowed their heads, some murmuring greetings in Japanese, others simply offering her space that had never been granted before. It was not full acceptance. Not yet. But it was the crack in the wall she had been hammering against for months. She stepped inside, bowed as always, and when she rose, she found the janitor watching her from the shadows. His lips curved into the faintest smile, his eyes glinting with something almost like pride. "Yesterday," he said softly, "you carried not just your own weight, but ours. That is what it means to honor the blade." She bowed to him, deeper than she had to anyone else, because she understood now that he had seen her long before anyone else dared to. Still, challenges remained. Takeshi did not return that morning, but whispers suggested his shame might drive him to act recklessly. The dojo's hierarchy had been shaken, and some students still questioned whether Amara's victory was enough to erase centuries of prejudice. Yet she did not waver. Each day she trained with renewed purpose, her strikes sharp, her focus unshakable. She no longer moved to prove herself to them. She moved to prove herself worthy of the sword, the name, the legacy. Days later, the sensei gathered the students for a formal announcement. "From this day," he declared, "Amara Yukimura will train not as an outsider, but as one of us. Her lineage has been revealed, her spirit undeniable. Any who challenge her must challenge me." His words were final, carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. Murmurs rippled through the dojo, but no one spoke against him. Even those who still harbored doubt lowered their heads, bound by the authority of the master. Amara felt a rush of emotions, relief, gratitude, disbelief. She had endured months of torment, of whispers and laughter, only to stand now at the center of respect. Yet she knew this was not the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. Legacy was not something simply inherited. It was something lived, proven day after day, cut by cut, choice by choice. That evening, she trained again in solitude, the blade flashing under the dim light. Her movements were no longer fueled by desperation, but by clarity. Each step was an affirmation, each strike a promise. The janitor passed by, pausing briefly before speaking a single word: "Samurai." She turned, met his eyes, and for the first time allowed herself a small smile. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Amara had experienced before. The dojo that had once been a place of humiliation slowly transformed into a place of growth. Students who had mocked her now approached quietly after training, asking questions about her techniques, some even bowing and requesting to spar with her respectfully. Their voices no longer carried laughter at her expense, but curiosity, even admiration. The nickname Kuroi Samurai still echoed sometimes, but its tone had shifted. It was no longer an insult whispered in the shadows. It had become a title, spoken aloud with a strange mix of awe and respect. Takeshi returned eventually, his pride scarred but not destroyed. He no longer attacked her openly, but his silence was louder than words. He trained with fury, his strikes harder, sharper, as if trying to erase the memory of his defeat. Yet whenever his eyes met hers, something in his expression had changed. There was no more smirk, no more mocking laughter. Only the weight of recognition, reluctant but undeniable. Their rivalry was not finished, but it had transformed into something closer to respect, however begrudging. One evening, the sensei called Amara to his chamber. The tatami mats smelled faintly of incense, the walls lined with scrolls of calligraphy. He gestured for her to kneel. "Your grandfather," he began, "must have carried this blade with purpose, but he gave it to you. Do you know why?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't." The sensei's eyes softened. "Because you are the one who could bear its weight. Many carry swords. Few carry the spirit to honor them." His gaze sharpened. "You will not only continue your training, you will preserve the legacy of Yukimura. This dojo is your home now." Her throat tightened, but she bowed low, her forehead brushing the mat. "I will not fail you." The sensei smiled faintly. "You will not fail yourself." That night, Amara sat by the window of her dorm, the city lights twinkling beyond the ancient rooftops. She unwrapped the sword once more, laying it across her knees. The steel gleamed, catching the reflection of the moon. She whispered softly, "I thought I came here to prove myself, but I think I came here to remember you, to remember me." For the first time in months, peace settled in her chest. The next day, the dojo held a formal ceremony. Students lined the hall, lanterns casting warm light across the polished wood. At the front, the sensei placed a scroll on the wall, an updated record of the dojo's lineage. He lifted a brush and wrote carefully, deliberately, in black ink, "Amara Yukimura. The characters stood bold against the paper, a permanent mark of her place in history. She bowed as the students clapped softly, the sound respectful, solemn. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held her head high. This was not just her victory. It was her grandfather's, her great-grandfather's, every ancestor whose blood had flowed into hers. As the ceremony ended, the janitor approached her quietly. "You carried the weight," he said. She smiled, bowing deeply. "Not alone. Never alone." He bowed back, and for the first time, she realized his bow was as deep as any student's. In the days that followed, Amara continued her training with new purpose. Every strike, every stance, every bow carried the knowledge that she was no longer fighting for acceptance. She was fighting for legacy, for respect, for every person who had ever been told they did not belong. And though she knew the world outside the dojo would still hold prejudice, she also knew something greater. She had the strength to endure, to rise, to claim her place. The story of the black samurai girl who had been mocked, humiliated, and cast aside, only to rise and reveal a bloodline that silenced her critics, began to spread beyond the dojo. Visitors whispered of her duel, of her discipline, of her fire. Some came just to glimpse the girl who had carried a lost clan back into living memory. She did not seek fame, but she understood now that her journey was not just her own. It was a message. Standing alone one evening in the courtyard, the wind tugging at her eye, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She felt the weight of history, yes, but also the lightness of freedom. She had been broken down, mocked, tripped, and left alone. But she had risen. She had endured. And now she carried forward not just her grandfather's sword, but the truth that worth is not written on skin, but in spirit. Her voice was quiet, but certain, as she whispered into the night. "They tried to break me. Instead, they revealed me." No matter where you come from, no matter the color of your skin or the weight of your past, your spirit is what defines you. And some spirits are unbreakable. If you believe in resilience, in respect, in legacy that crosses borders, then share this story, leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Your voice matters, just as every spirit matters.